one of the things that struck me as odd is that I learned that there was at least three different methods of learning. There's kinetic.
Yeah.
There's what else is there? In mind, what was it again? What are the three forms of learning,
I,
man?
I, the problem is everyone has a different term for each of them,
Exactly,
and a different
exactly.
understanding or
But
criteria for what fits each. Like
ultimately,
I would argue, what is kinetic? Is that
true.
isn't kinetic like the physical learning in
Exactly,
person? Okay, yeah, so the
exactly.
practical learning
Yes,
versus the one in the head. I'm assuming your meaning is like the one that they usually do in the curriculum at schools here, which
exactly.
is that you just sit there and you get told this is what this test is, and then you just test. A lot of times in the U.S. school system, whether it's a private school or not, so a higher end school or not, you'll find that the teachers and the admin of a school will actually get mad at a student even if they do they follow the rules of a test or of an assignment correctly, and they do it exactly to a T, but they still make it their own
Exactly.
because the answers or the way that what they said wasn't aligned with what the school administration wanted or required of them to say. It suddenly is rejected and they get like a failing grade because it's like you didn't, and or just like retaliation because you did not do what they in their head said you had to do. So only the ones that pass are not the ones who do a good job of their work and do good research or anything else. It
Exactly.
doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with, did you comply with what I expect you to write and say? Are the answers the ones that I already had preordained in my head or in the context of the curriculum? Are those boxes checked off?
Exactly.
If not, you're
Exactly.
failed. And it's like, what the fuck? Like my brother Mario had actually experienced that in a private school that is the Portland Arts and Communications at the time. They had just gotten a new administrator at that time when he entered it, and that administrator I think lasted like 3 years, but they were like a complete tyrant about that kind of thing. So they even stifled the creativity
Wow.
of their own students, which is like,
Wow.
why do you call yourself arts and communications if
Exactly.
you stifle that intentionally? But yeah, so I just wanted to make that point to that.
Exactly. But I mean, ultimately, heck, even in that regard, when it comes to science, in that regard, one of the first immutable laws of science is that basically you have theory. Ultimately, theory is not fact.
That's one thing that, although that almost it semi diverges off of the educational topic, because that's just talking about science at that point. But mainstream science is what I always like to emphasize: mainstream science, because there's also quantum science. Quantum science is old world or old school science, even
Okay.
like of the 60s, 70s, and a little bit into the 80s,
Yeah.
because that was real science that actually acknowledged that there's only theory, aka a educated or even well educated guess,
Exactly.
and that science is one of the key foundations is that it's not to prove something necessarily, but more to try to disprove something that has been proven many times over, because they want to see if they can form cracks. If they can form cracks in a certain theory that was believed to be factually correct about
Yes.
whatever the heck it might be, it could literally be anything, then that proves it's not solid anymore, and therefore it's not necessarily truly, you can't claim it's factual, because if there's
Exactly.
cracks that form when you scrutinize it, it's going to prove that there's something missing, that there's
Exactly.
something inaccurate in it, and that now you have to figure it out, which is one of the good things about real science like that. Of course, quantum science therefore goes into everything well beyond the
True.
material,
True.
whereas mainstream modern science is all about material everything and foundations, and that's why they have this whole thing called science fact, because they're more worried about appeasing a human ego and mind, which is, I need familiarity, I need all this other, material physical stuff. If I don't have that, it has to be impossible,
Exactly.
because otherwise, God forbid, you go into an existential crisis,
Existential crisis.
or you just immediately get thrown in a psych ward for an evaluation because you don't, you're not obeying the mainstream and the bootlicking the
Yes.
mind that as everyone else agrees upon certain things or whatever. And that's why quantum science is better than mainstream. That's why I emphasize that. But that's also why I really hate mainstream science, modern mainstream science, because most of it's actually inaccurate and or it's fraudulent. It's fabricated out of thin air, because there's a big amount of PACs and all these other corporations or other rich interests that go and they pay for these studies to output, what they want them to output, so that it
Exactly.
favors them, so they have a better bottom line and they have a bigger monopoly. It's really frustrating. We can see that rampant today, which of course makes all of us lunatics and all of our right conspiracy theorists, of course, because that would never be
Oh,
true.
yeah.
Much like all the people walking into Nazi Germany said at the time. All the Germans were like, that'll never happen to us. We wouldn't let that happen. And guess what happened? They sleepwalked themselves right in, apathetically. Because, well, it's absolutely factually correct. I mean, this would never happen to us, and it did. So,
Exactly.
it's not actually science. It's opinion.
Yeah, it's opinion. But, yeah, or rather, they're parroting what...
Or what the special interest funded.
Yes.
To find in their research, yeah.
Yes. The fact is that ultimately, the educational system parrots belief structures and all sorts of stuff that may not necessarily be correct or has flaws in it as well. So, what's your take on that?
I mean, it's obviously true. But it's true across the board because humans are obsessed with being extremists. Exactly. They always have to, once they get one extreme, say, if you're going to do the usual oversimplified, illegitimate, left, right, linear spectrum, right? 2D spectrum. They might go extreme left in their education or whatever the heck they teach and their beliefs. And then all of a sudden, because in backlash to that, they rip back the opposite direction and now they want to go far right. And that's like the theological, conservative, Bible thumping, religious school type of shit, which is actually what's kind of happening right now because of all the DEI related, the trans stuff, especially, and all that crap that's in schools now, rampant across the U.S. Now it's starting to rip the other direction, and actually that's probably also why politically around the world, a lot of people are starting to go towards the right, much further to the right politically in their voting across the entire world, especially in Europe, than they are going left, because Europe and North America were the two places in the world that were like obsessed with the whole DEI and LGBTQ plus letters, numbers, and symbols people and stuff, and all, especially the trans stuff. And now, because it's finally coming to a head, the proverbial pendulum is going to rip the opposite direction. But that's why you never see anything in the middle, or in a balanced take, or in a balanced policies, including in education, let alone politics or sociology or anything else, because humans are creatures of extremes. They just want it their way, and if it means impulsively ripping the opposite direction and going further than they actually normally would want, just to retaliate, they're going to do that. And the educational system's always done that.
Exactly.
Especially modern day, like probably since I'd say at least the 70s forward. Because obviously, the further back in time you go, the actual origination of the U.S. educational system comes closer into view. And thus it's more still as it was when it was formed, which, by the way, was as a byproduct of the United States Department of Agriculture when it was formed in the 1800s.